Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the White House Special Envoy Jared Kushner met this week to discuss the situation in the Gaza Strip, specifically the fate of around 200 Hamas terrorists who are trapped in tunnels underneath Rafah and other areas under the IDF's control. A leader of an anti-Hamas militia in the Gaza Strip also met with Kushner in Israel and will tell you more about this. And meanwhile, Israeli officials are expressing concern over the new move by the Hamas terrorist organization, and the IDF reports that the tunnel where the remains of Hadar Goldin were held for 11 years has been demolished. Also, within the Trump administration, there are fears that the ceasefire plan is in trouble, as Gaza is being turned into two zones, one in which Hamas is reasserting its control and the other in which the IDF is staying in place. And meanwhile, at a cost of about $500,000, the United States is advancing a plan to establish a giant military base in the Gaza envelope area that will serve international forces who will monitor the ceasefire. And in the northern arena, the IDF continues to strike Hezbollah infrastructure, and Hezbollah Secretary General Naim Qassem issues a warning from his bunker saying, "There is a limit. The situation cannot continue." So I must say that I agree with him. This situation cannot continue, so Hezbollah should stop with its violations of the terms of the ceasefire agreement, which is the reason that Israel keeps hitting them. However, it's unlikely that Hezbollah will stop its violations, and the senior IDF official confirmed this week that his forces are ready for a move in Lebanon if needed. But Hezbollah leaders are not just making threats from bunkers. They're also trying to confuse Israeli intelligence by getting plastic surgeries to disguise themselves. But this isn't helping them very much, because Israel keeps eliminating them one after the other. And a recent intelligence assessment said that most of the terrorists who knew where all the rockets and the missiles are have been lost, and they took that knowledge with them. But there's also more drama to Israel's north, as Turkey, with American assistance, is preparing to deploy forces in Gaza despite Israeli objections. Turkish involvement in Syria is also deepening, and Qatar is also playing a role in Israel's strategic arena. Israel is trying to push back against the Qatari influence, but they got a lot of resources and a lot of allies. And elsewhere, the visit of Syrian interim President Abu Muhammad al-Julani to the White House appears to have been a very fruitful visit, and al-Julani is not ruling out joining the Abraham Accords, and President Trump said after the meeting that an announcement will be made soon on Syria-Israel relations. However, there is a looming threat of renewed conflict with Iran because the Ayatollah regime doesn't know what else to do, and they're making threats and forgetting how vulnerable they really are. So welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host Yair Pinto, bringing you the whole truth about what is happening in Israel. And just before we dive into today's headlines, make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you remain tuned to the truth in real time and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. A de facto partition of the Gaza Strip between an area under Israeli control and an area under the Hamas control is becoming more and more plausible amidst an apparent freeze in the process of the ceasefire plan into Stage B. According to reports this week, the lack of progress could lead to years of separation, but Hamas is not wasting any time. They are exploiting the power vacuum to reestablish their civilian and also their security control. And despite this, White House Special Envoy Jared Kushner urged Israel to allow the safe passage to Hamas-controlled areas for the terrorists that are trapped in tunnels underneath areas under the IDF's control, claiming that if they surrender their weapons, this would be considered part of the demilitarization of the entire Gaza Strip. An Israeli source told the Kan news media portal that the proposal is naive. The weapons will be waiting for them at home. Another proposal reportedly discussed in the meeting was for the terrorists to be exiled to a third country, although no one has agreed to take them in, but the Prime Minister's office denied reports that this proposal was even accepted. And in related news, Over the past month, attempts to smuggle weapons into the Gaza Strip using drones have been identified. The IDF warns that as many as 1,800 drones have crossed into the Israeli territory from the Sinai Peninsula, Egypt, with many of them passing into the Gaza Strip. They are carrying all kinds of contraband, including weapons, ammunition, and narcotics. Close by, the United States is advancing a plan to establish a large military base in the Gaza envelope area that will serve international forces that are able to house several thousands of soldiers with the aim of maintaining the ceasefire agreement. And in recent weeks, the United States has worked to promote the issue with the government and with the IDF, and has even begun examining potential locations, and a security source commented that this indicates how determined the Americans are to be involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And in the northern arena, Hezbollah Secretary General Naim Qassem is hiding in his bunker, making videos in which he threatens Israel, saying there is a limit, the situation cannot continue. We will defend our land and our dignity. He added that Hezbollah will not disarm, as everybody else in the land of Lebanon and most of the people in the surrounding countries have said that they need to do, and which Israel has said very clearly that they must do or risk an escalation in the conflict. Instead, Qassem said that we will defend ourselves. Any price is lower than the price of surrender. When we die, we win, according to the Hezbollah leader. You know what? Israel also wins when Hezbollah dies. It seems to me that this ultimate is a win-win situation for us. But jokes aside, the statement by Qassem came as IDF forces continue to operate in southern Lebanon to strike Hezbollah infrastructure and to prevent a buildup of weapons that Iran is trying to smuggle to them. For instance, this week, in a nighttime operation by the 769th Brigade forces in southern Lebanon, several buildings used as Hezbollah terror infrastructures were destroyed, and we'll have more details about that later on in this report. But Hezbollah is also trying to trick Israel with a new tactic, altering their appearance with plastic surgeries. Dozens of members of the terrorist organizations, including senior commanders who were wounded in strikes, changed their facial features to make it harder to find them and to evade identification. It doesn't seem to be working, as these senior operatives continue to be eliminated in Israeli strikes, but you have to give them credit for trying something new, something out of a James Bond movie. However, in a rare interview, the Lebanese journalist Rami Naim claimed that Hezbollah is in total collapse, having lost its capabilities and its public trust. He also predicted that Lebanon and Israel will soon sign a peace agreement. So I say that that would be wonderful, and I hope that it happens. But there was also some good news for Hezbollah this week, as IDF spokesperson in Arabic, Colonel Avichai Aderi, announced his retirement after 30 years. Hezbollah gave him the nickname Angel of Death, and he has earned that grudging respect and affection of millions of people all over the region, significantly altering public opinion, often at the expense of Hezbollah. But now, he's exiting the stage, and in Lebanon, they simply refuse to believe it. Also in this broadcast, TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will bring us all the details about the visit of Syria's president to the United States and why it is far more significant than it seems. US President Donald Trump spoke after his meeting with El-Julani at the White House on Monday that you can expect an announcement on the Israel-Syria issue very soon. And the Syrian Foreign Ministry said that the meeting lasted more than an hour in a friendly and constructive atmosphere, while El-Julani himself said that the United States might be brokering negotiations for Syria to join the Abraham Accords. However, on the margins of the unprecedented visit to the White House, Syria's president also faced tough questions about his alleged involvement in the September 11 attacks. In related news, it appears that Turkey was also involved in brokering the improved relations between the United States and Syria, and they are also trying, with US assistance, to deploy forces to Gaza as part of the international force that is meant to govern the Gaza Strip in Phase 2 of the ceasefire plan. Israel has strongly objected this, but it might be about to happen. Turkey's foreign minister met in Washington with ministers from the United States and from Syria this week and will soon host his counterpart from Egypt, who, according to the reports, agrees with Israel's rejection of the Turkish involvement in the international force that will soon enter the Gaza Strip. And in the Arab media, questions are also being raised about the composition of the force, while, according to one report, Turkey already completed preparations to deploy its forces in the Gaza Strip. And finally, the Chief of Staff of Iran's naval forces of the Revolutionary Guards, General Ali Abdullahi El-Abadi, declared this week that Iran's armed forces are at the highest level of readiness and are prepared to deal with any threat to the borders. Israel does not have a border with Iran, but maybe no one ever told them about all of that. So, something else that no one seems to have ever told the Iranian leadership is that they are in a far more danger from Israel than Israel is in danger from them. For the sake of ordinary Iranian people, I hope that someone can help the regime understand before they make a big mistake. However, the severe drought that is striking the Islamic Republic raises the risk and the threshold for another round of fighting with Israel, because the regime has no idea what to do about the crisis, but they seem to think that if they start another war with Israel, it will lower the risk of an internal uprising against them. So we have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, with me is Mati Shoshani, and together we are bringing you this boots on the ground report with the whole truth about what's happening in Israel amidst the ongoing battle against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are operating under the control of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we begin, I want to call on you to keep spreading the truth. We at Boots on the Ground manage day by day to gather information from this region firsthand, but we need your help. You are the ambassadors of truth, and every day the state of Israel is under attacks by organizations and governments that publish lies, fake news, and anti-Semitic propaganda against us. So together with you, we manage to reach as many people as possible and succeed. So make sure to hit the like button, leave a comment, share this video, and above all, subscribe to TBN Israel YouTube channel. So we'll start with a boots on the ground report on what's happening in the Gaza Strip. The IDF spokesperson announced this week that a few hours after the return of the remains of the fallen soldier Lieutenant Hadar Goldin, Nahal Brigade infantry soldiers of the IDF destroyed the shaft from which he was abducted more than 11 years ago. This represents the closing of an account that was open for far too long. And meanwhile, over the past month, the security establishment has been engaged in an intensified effort to address a worrying change in weapon smuggling patterns, as the terrorist organizations, especially Hamas, have begun using drones to transfer weapons from the Sinai Peninsula into the Gaza Strip. During the last month alone, IDF fighters identified at least 3 attempts to smuggle weapons into Gaza that were carried out using drones. This development concerns the security services, especially in light of the smuggling loophole that already exists on the southern border. The phenomenon is particularly troubling against the backdrop of the high figures of drones that are infiltrating from the Egyptian border into the Israeli territory. During an internal discussion that was held last week, a division commander noted that since the beginning of the year, about 2,000 drones have crossed the border from Sinai into Israel. Even more troubling is that only about 10% of all these drones were intercepted. This means that about 1,800 drones successfully crossed the border, with each one carrying contraband, including weapons, ammunition, and narcotics. Many of these cargoes are being received by criminal gangs in the Negev and possibly also in Judea and Samaria. The concern is that Hamas is aware of these gaps and will try to exploit them to establish an easier and faster aerial supply line to the Gaza Strip as well. It should be noted that the phenomenon of smuggling from Sinai into Israel is not new, and only last week the Minister of Defense instructed that the Israeli-Egyptian border and all of that area be declared as a closed military zone. The IDF is aware of the evolving threat and is trying to deal with the phenomenon with a variety of tools, including direct fire at drones and through the establishment of dedicated units for detection and neutralization, to the use of advanced technological means for intelligence collection and for tracking. And meanwhile, there is a dispute between the United States and Israel over the solution to the crisis of terrorists that are trapped in the tunnels running underneath Rafah. The White House Special Envoy Jared Kushner conveyed a message to Israel this week that it should release all the terrorists to the Gaza side that is controlled by Hamas. According to him, they would be released without weapons, and this would be considered part of the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. Rumors say that Israel and the United States formulated a compromise under which 200 terrorists staying in the underground route on the Israeli side of the Rafah area in Gaza would be exiled to a third country, but so far, no country that came up has agreed to accept them. Can't blame them. Furthermore, an Israeli official said that it's a naive proposal. The weapons will be waiting for them at home. In addition, a political source responded to the publications on the matter, saying, contrary to the reports, there is no agreed solution regarding the terrorists in Rafah. And meanwhile, the Saudi media portal El-Hadet reported on Tuesday from its sources that Yasser Abu Shabab, the head of the militia opposing Hamas from East Rafah, met with Kushner at the headquarters of the American forces in Kiryat Gat, in Israel. The sources reported that in the meeting it was agreed that Abu Shabab's forces would secure the exit of Hamas terrorists that are besieged in Rafah, and that the evacuation would be carried out towards areas currently under the terrorist organization's control inside the Gaza Strip. In addition, the report notes that Abu Shabab's representatives are permanently stationed at the headquarters in Kiryat Gat, which suggests ongoing involvement in coordinating moves in the Gaza Strip and its surrounding areas. However, an Israeli source denied that the militia leader met with Kushner in Israel. And here, at TBN Israel, we will continue to report the whole truth, and we invite you to continue and spread it with us. Together, let's make sure that everybody knows what is really happening here in Israel. So, share this content, leave a click on the like button, and of course, don't forget to write us in the comments what you'd like us to talk about in these reports. Now, I want to talk to you for just a moment about one of our partners we are proud to be working with. The war may be over in some parts for now, but for millions of Israelis, the crisis is far from over. Families are still displaced, and over 2 million people remain food insecure. They include Holocaust survivors, the elderly, and children who are trying to rebuild their lives with almost nothing. They need your help. The Joseph Project International is Israel's #1 importer of humanitarian aid. Since the Swords of Iron War began in October 7, 2023, they've delivered more than 1,500 truckloads of life-saving supplies, from food and diapers to hygiene kits and bomb shelter gear. All of it is distributed from their warehouse in the Jerusalem area, and over $26 million in aid was delivered since this war began. That's amazing. And here's the big miracle. Every dollar that you give provides $13 worth of critical supplies, thanks to their global network and efficient logistics. Though the headlines may have faded, the need has not. This is your moment to stand with Israel. Go to josephprojectsupport.com. Again, that's josephprojectsupport.com. Your gift brings dignity, relief, and hope to those that are still recovering in Israel. So be part of God's provision. They need your help today. Now, we're keeping our focus on the southern part of Israel because the United States is planning to establish a large military base in the Gaza envelope area. And according to a report in the Shumim media portal, this is the plan that is on the table now. And Israeli officials briefed on the preliminary plans say that the base is intended for the use of the international forces that will operate in the Gaza Strip to maintain the ceasefire agreement, and that it will be able to house several thousands of soldiers. The construction budget, they add, is expected to be around $500 million. And in recent weeks, the Americans have worked to promote the issue with the government and with the IDF, and have even begun examining potential locations in the envelope surrounding the Gaza Strip. It is hard to overstate the significance of establishing a base in that location. According to them, since the Six-Day War, Israel has done everything that it can to reduce direct international involvement in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but the establishment of the base and the deployment of forces on Israeli soil indicates how determined the Americans are to get involved in Gaza. The massive investment in the base outside the United States could also have domestic American implications, as many in the Republican Party oppose expanding American military involvement overseas. So far, the US military presence in Israel is quite limited. After the signing of the ceasefire agreement, the United States sent about 200 soldiers to Israel, and they currently operate from the American Command Center in Kiryat Gat. In addition, during the war, the United States also deployed in Israel the THAAD missile batteries and assisted in intercepting Iranian missiles and also missiles from Houthi and other targets and threats that were launched at Israel. So this planned base would be a large expansion of this force. It would also augment American moves that have already reduced Israel's freedom of action in the Gaza Strip, especially around the issue of introducing humanitarian aid into Gaza, which Israel used as a leverage over Hamas. According to Israeli sources, the American Command Center in Kiryat Gat is expected to take full control of the distribution of humanitarian aid, and Israel will be left with only a marginal role through the coordinator of government activities in the Palestinian territories. Dr. Michael Milstein, a senior researcher at the Dayan Center at the Tel Aviv University and former head of the Palestinian Affairs Department in Military Intelligence, told Shomrim that the CMCC in Kiryat Gat is going to be responsible for most of the activity in the Gaza Strip, and Israel's status as a central player in the Gaza Strip is going to change. In related news, reports emerged in the Israel Hayom news portal this week that the United States is expected to place on the United Nations Security Council table the draft resolution on the future of Gaza. The draft will be open for comments for 24 hours, and then the Americans intend to vote on the resolution this coming Friday, or at least next Monday. In the last 24 hours, the United States introduced several changes in the draft in accordance with the party's comments. Some of the changes are good for Israel and more strongly anchor the commitments to dismantle Hamas of its weapons and demilitarize Gaza. Others do not align with Israel's interests. One of the more problematic changes is the cancellation of the sanctions of removing international aid organizations that will cooperate with terror. The original wording of the resolution explicitly stated that any organization found to have engaged in misuse of such aid will be deemed ineligible to provide continued or future aid. These words do not appear in the new draft. Instead, it is stated that such aid must be ensured to be used solely for peaceful purposes and not diverted to armed groups. However, the sanctions of suspending an organization whose employees were found to have assisted terror, as happened with UNRWA, was cancelled. Conversely, on the positive side, the revised wording will indicate that the IDF withdrawal will be conditional on full demilitarization and in coordination with the United States and the Arab governments. According to the new draft, the phased withdrawal of the IDF from the Gaza Strip will take place only after agreed standards of demilitarization and security are achieved. And according to the wordings, the IDF will withdraw in accordance with milestones and timelines to be set jointly with the security forces, the guarantor states, and the United States. And a limited Israeli security presence will remain until the prevention of the return of terror is ensured. The new clause in the decision obligates the International Transition Body, BOP, to submit a written report every 6 months to the Security Council on the progress of implementing Gaza's demilitarization on the ground. This step is intended to strengthen transparency and oversight of the mechanism's work. It should be noted that a similar mechanism was supposed to have functioned for years in southern Lebanon through UNIFIL, but in practice, it did not do its job at all. However, Western officials warned that the Gaza Strip could in practice be divided into two separate areas, one under Israeli control and the other under Hamas control, and against the backdrop of the stalemate in advancing United States President Donald Trump's plan to end this war, this is the situation on the ground. According to Reuters' report, citing 6 European officials that are involved in the efforts, the next phase of the plan is stuck, and reconstruction is focusing only on the Israeli side of the Gaza Strip. The officials warned that the lack of progress could lead to years of separation. According to the first phase of the plan, which went into effect on October 10th, Israel controls about 53% of the Gaza Strip's territory, including extensive agricultural areas, Rafah in the south, and areas in Gaza City. Nearly 2 million Palestinians have been pushed into tent camps and the ruins of the cities that remained under Hamas control. And then Reuters drone footage shows near total destruction in the northeastern part of Gaza City, parts of which were captured by the IDF before the ceasefire. The next phase of the Trump plan includes a further IDF withdrawal from the Yellow Line, the establishment of a temporary transition authority, the deployment of a multinational security force, and the disarmament of Hamas. However, there are no clear timelines or mechanisms for implementation of any of all of this. Furthermore, Hamas refuses to disarm, Israel opposes Palestinian Authority involvement, and there is ambiguity surrounding the establishment of the International Stabilization Force. In the absence of significant American pressure, officials cited that the report assesses that the Yellow Line could become a de facto border between the two areas. The United States drafted a Security Council resolution that would grant a transition authority and the international force a 2-year mandate, but diplomats report that 10 countries, including Arab and European ones, are hesitant and have already made it clear that they will not participate in the force if the mission includes direct confrontation with Hamas terrorists. US Vice President J.D. Vance and Kushner proposed channeling reconstruction funds to the area under the Israeli control, even without moving to the next phase of the plan, in order to create a model zone where some of Gaza's residents would live. But according to the researchers at the International Crisis Group, such initiatives could entrench a long-term split reality. A United States State Department spokesperson claimed that significant progress had been made in advance and the plan, but admitted that there is more work to be done, without addressing whether reconstruction would be limited to the Israeli side or not. And meanwhile, the IDF is placing large yellow concrete blocks along the withdrawal line and building infrastructure on the side under its control. In the Sajaiya neighborhood of Gaza City, fortified positions established after the ceasefire were presented to the journalists, and satellite images show earth berms and rubble compacted into observation mounds. The IDF's international media spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Nadav Shoshani, explained that the forces are preventing terrorists from crossing the line, and Israel will withdraw only after Hamas is disarmed and an international force is deployed. On their side of the Yellow Line, Hamas is re-establishing its control, executing rivals, and rebuilding police and civil service personnel to clean the streets. In light of these developments, German Foreign Minister Johann Wedfol has called for swift action, warning that the security vacuum in the Gaza Strip must be filled, and adding that a renewed strengthening of Hamas could lead to another Israeli operation in Gaza. And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to update you on every development, so keep spreading the truth and click the subscribe button so that you remain tuned to boots on the ground and know how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Now, we are switching our focus to the northern arena, where Hezbollah in Lebanon continues to violate the ceasefire agreement. On Monday night, 769th Brigade forces destroyed several buildings that served as terrorist infrastructure for the Hezbollah terrorist organization in the village of Hula in southern Lebanon. The operation was carried out as part of the IDF's ongoing military activity in the area, and according to the IDF spokesperson, in addition to destroying the buildings, forces operating in the same area last month located weapons and old explosive charges that had been stored in those buildings and neutralized them. The IDF emphasized that the presence of the infrastructure constitutes a violation of the agreement between Israel and Lebanon. And meanwhile, Hezbollah Secretary General Naim Qassem issued a sharp threat to Israel on Tuesday, warning that the Israeli strikes cannot continue. Everything has a limit. We will not relinquish our weapons. However, in addition to the airstrikes on individual Hezbollah operatives and weapons depots in southern Lebanon, the IDF is also sending ground forces to conduct targeted raids in the security area in accordance with the understandings that are reached with the international recognized government of Lebanon. The aim of these raids is to disrupt Hezbollah's rehabilitation efforts and the organization's terrorist infrastructure. However, the IDF is preparing for the possibility of increasing intensity with regards to the operations in Lebanon. The military has presented the political echelon with several possible courses of action amidst the backdrop of Israel's understandings that the Lebanese state is not doing enough to curb Hezbollah's power. The message being conveyed to Hezbollah is that as long as the current situation continues, Israel will continue to strike even if it leads to escalation. And on that note, according to sources in the security establishment and the IDF, Israel is preparing disproportionate moves for the possibility that the situation will escalate. Furthermore, Israeli officials are beginning to say that after several months in which targeted strikes and raids have not brought about a change in Hezbollah's behavior, there is a need to go for a few days of combat in Lebanon in order to increase the pressure and make good on this threat. But it is unclear to what extent the limited days of combat will succeed in bringing the needed change. And another unknown is that Hezbollah's response to the days of combat, and whether contrary to the existing situation in which they are not responding to Israel's strikes, they will decide to renew rocket fire and missiles into Israel, which could drag the region into a full-scale war. In the security establishment and the political echelon, they are not saying that the end point will be in days of combats, and they're not sure if this will gain the control over Hezbollah. So what all of you think about this, I'm curious to hear. So let me know, should Israel go on a few days of conflict to teach Hezbollah a lesson, to make sure that we're not bluffing? Let me know what you think. Recently, there have been reports of weapon smuggling from Iran through Syria to Lebanon, but it is a very small quantity, and therefore there are hardly any interdiction strikes in Syria. In Hezbollah's depots in Lebanon, there are still thousands of rockets and a massive quantity of weapons that Hezbollah is trying to hide and rearrange. This is as part of the terrorist organization's rehabilitation after taking a hard blow in the campaign against Israel a year ago this month. However, as part of the Israeli Air Force strikes in Lebanon, Israel is trying to exert pressure with the aim of getting the Lebanese government, with the help of international actors, to dismantle Hezbollah themselves. But it is not clear whether such a move is possible in light of Lebanon's international and internal situation. And now, to a short story that emerged this week in the Saudi news portal Al-Hadat, which says a lot. Much of it is very absurd about Hezbollah's state of mind these days. So, Hezbollah operatives, including senior commanders who were wounded in the past Israeli strikes, underwent dozens of plastic surgeries over recent months in an attempt to make it harder to locate them again and to evade identification. According to the report, the surgeries were performed in Iraq, in Iran, and in Hezbollah clinics in Lebanon. It was also reported that there are commanders who are not wounded and nevertheless underwent surgeries as a preventative measure. All I can say is that this is a somewhat original idea, but it doesn't seem to have done Hezbollah much good, as Israel has continued to target and eliminate Hezbollah leaders despite their new faces. So I would also like to point out that there are a lot of ways to identify someone even without getting a good look at their face. For instance, most people have a distinct way of moving when they walk, and a computer can easily pick that up, especially a super spy computer and advanced cameras. So even from a long distance away you can do that. So my advice to Hezbollah is to stop wasting time and money on plastic surgeries, even though it's pretty cool and it was used in a James Bond movie in the past. So in any case, we will continue to report on every development in this matter, so keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us. And most importantly, make sure to hit the subscribe button so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And now, we turn to TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani, who will give us all the details on the Syrian president's visit to the United States and why this is far more significant for Israel than it might seem. So over to you, Mati.
Guys, Syria is back on the table. We just witnessed a very dramatic and substantial meeting between President Trump and Ashara, the leader of Syria, the leader of the HTS party or movement that has been governing the land of Syria. And what we're looking at right now unfold before our eyes is a shift in power in the northern border of Israel that is going to determine what happens with Iranian influence in Syria, with Lebanon ultimately, and of course, especially what happens between the Syrian people and Israel. Over the next couple of minutes, we're going to unpack all of that. These are dramatic, substantial, and very meaningful steps that are taking place right in front of our eyes. And we're going to unfold all of that for you to better understand what happened. So let's start with the facts. The leader of Syria, of HTS, a man who was on the most wanted list for the United States just a short time ago, is now visiting the White House. He had a visit with President Trump, not an official visit, but yet a visit in the White House, in the Oval Office, between US President Donald Trump and Ashara, the leader of Syria, the leader of the HTS movement that swept through Syria and overthrew a more than 50-year-long dictatorship of the Assad family in that country. So this is a very dramatic event that takes place in front of us. And the goal here is, before we move on into the details, to reshape the Middle East. The Trump administration, the US administration, has been wise, has been clever, has been very, very meticulous in building up the infrastructure needed to reshape the power balance in this region, to make sure that in the day after the ceasefire agreements, Israel doesn't stand alone against a Syria that is not rebuilt, that is still funded by terrorist elements, that Lebanon is stabilized, that Hamas in Gaza is no longer at the helm, and of course that the Iranians are pushed back. And this move that we're watching here today is exactly that. The meeting between President Trump and President Ashara of Syria is exactly a move towards stabilizing this region. Now, let me give you a bit of a backdrop. This conversation has been on the table for quite some time now, in the sense that the US has been signaling to the Syrian government that they want to bring them back into the fold, that they want them to once again be a country that is accepted. They've removed them from the sanctions list. They've allowed Ashara, who used to be a wanted terrorist, to travel freely around the world, including a visit to the UN General Assembly just a month and a half ago. So we've been seeing the motions in place leading towards this moment. And now we're seeing sort of the culmination of that in a very dramatic, very substantial meeting in which direct conversations are taking place between the leader of Syria and the leader of the free world, President Donald Trump. And in that conversation, on the table, is the question of how do we stabilize Syria in the day after? How is a ceasefire that will last for many years going to be implemented and built in this region? And how do we make sure that it lasts? How do we ensure that just a month or two from now, there isn't a round of exchanges between the Israeli forces and the Syrian forces? So here are the big moving pieces that were discussed in this meeting. So what is on the table? The next big moves here are very, very clear. First of all, we're talking about rebuilding what happens on the border between Israel and Syria. How does that look? Well, the US is planning to put a base near Damascus to supervise the ceasefire and to make sure that the next phases of this agreement are played out carefully and according to the details in the written agreement whenever that materializes fully. The second phase to that is reinstating diplomatic ties between the Syrian government and the American people. And that means having a Syrian embassy in Washington, D.C., something I don't think any of us could have seen coming just a few months ago even in this scenario. Another big thing is building a force that will be able to govern what's happening on the border between Syria and Israel and putting in place the mechanisms that will ensure safety for both sides in the situation. The Syrians, of course, want sovereignty and don't want Israel traveling through their land as we are currently. And of course, at the same time, Israel wants to make sure that Syria is stable and is not a passageway for the Iranians. The big play here behind the scenes is not just Syria. The big play here is blocking out Iranian influence inside the land of Syria. Syria, to remind you, is a land corridor between the desert that leads from Iraq through the Syrian eastern desert, through Syria proper, and then into Lebanon. So when you think about the arc of influence of Iranian terrorism in this land, that is the way they've been able in the past to traffic personnel, including Revolutionary Guard officers that used to be present both in Syria and in Lebanon, to traffic weapons, to traffic goods, and now currently trafficking cash by hand into Lebanon to try to rebuild Hezbollah. So locking down what happens inside Syria and eliminating the Iranian influence in that is a crucial point for the American government and, of course, for the Syrian government. Now, there's another really big piece here. Syria wants stability, and Assad wants to be the leader that will rebuild the relationship and the stature of the Syrian people, and this agreement is exactly that. But there's another really big point here, and that's the Israeli piece. Currently, I need to remind you, Israel has soldiers on the ground inside of Syria. In fact, Yair and myself were there on the ground just over a month ago, and I have friends who are currently serving in the IDF on the ground inside of Syria, making sure that no wave of terrorists that comes from the Syrian desert or possibly from Iran washes up on the shores of the Israeli Golan Heights. Because this agreement is going to reshape or rebuild the future of the Israeli and the Syrian Golan Heights, a crucial geographical point both for observation and for firepower in the northern part of this country. Now, where does Israel come into all of this? That is a very important, very critical question. Let me tell you the answer. Israel's concerned about several things. We want to see stability in Damascus. We want to make sure that if Assad continues to be the leader of the Syrian people, that he moves away from the radical roots that he came from and moves into a more moderate leader that has ties to the West. We're very happy to see American influence and American involvement in this agreement. And importantly, we want to make sure that we have a communication channel to allow us to intervene, interfere, and input on what's happening on the ground in Syria. Because the big key phrase for Israel is not just what's happening in Syria, what's happening to the minorities in Syria, and not just any minority, specifically the Druze minority in Syria. That's a huge point that we've talked about a lot in the past. I'll just remind you shortly that there was an attempted massacre and possibly genocide of the Syrian minority inside Syria by people related to and possibly encouraged by the current president of Syria, Assad. So this happened just a couple months ago, and we want to make sure, Israel wants to make sure that if this agreement moves forward, what we have on the table is a humanitarian passageway from Israel into Suida, which is sort of the capital of Druze presence inside Syria. Druze are a minority that is very important to the Israeli people because they're part of our country, and these people are family linked between borders. So it's very important for us to ensure the safety of those people. Israel and the United States want to make sure that Iran is out of the picture, that they no longer have a foothold, physically speaking, inside Syria, that they can't travel freely, they can't transfer goods, and they can't influence what's happening here. And for us to do that would be a wonderful way of disconnecting their influence in this region and making sure that we move into a future where they're no longer present. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is the Iranian regime and its attempt to maintain control of what's happening on the northern border of Israel and, of course, on every border of Israel. The big play here is weakening Iranian influence in Syria and through Syria in Lebanon too. That is a big play for Israel, that's a big play for the United States, and ultimately it would also be the good thing for the people of Syria. So how do we do that? We need to make sure that this agreement removes Iranian presence on the ground from Syria, that it creates a land blockade, as in there's boots on the ground and surveillance to make sure that the Iranians are not traveling freely through Syria as they have been doing in the past, including in recent weeks. And for that to happen, there needs to be a long-standing agreement, a mechanism of supervision that includes international forces, such as what the US is suggesting, which would be US troops or US personnel on the ground, and of course Israeli intelligence that will ensure this happens. Because ultimately, that is the goal of everyone who's involved in this picture. Now let me say something else here. There's another country that is deeply involved that has a stake in what's happening here, which is the Turkish government. They have been sort of the emerging power in this reshuffling of power in the Middle East. They were part of what happened in the Gaza Strip, in the ceasefire agreement, and they want to be part of what's happening in rebuilding Syria. They want to be part of that because they're involved and invested in, one, taking over power in this part of the world, but they also want to make sure that their stake, which has to do with the Kurdish minority and the relationships they have with the Lebanese, the Syrians, and several other countries, that their agenda is also protected in this agreement. So they too are part of the conversation, they too are part of the negotiation, albeit in a much more backdoor kind of way at this point. But again, moving forward, the Turks want to have a stake, they want to have a part of what's happening on the ground inside Syria. And that brings us to the final piece in this puzzle. What happens with Syria? This play that we're witnessing in front of our eyes is a very dramatic shift from a Syria that was a fractured country, a broken country, where other countries were pulling off pieces of it. That included the Russians, that included part of Assad's regime, that included the Iranians, to a country that now is controlled by one faction or one party with the help of external power, be it the Americans in this case. This would be a move forward for them into stability, into independence, and into security that could trickle down into this entire region. Now let me remind you what's been happening behind the scenes outside of the conversations between the leader of Syria, Al-Shara, and President Trump. Israel has been waging a campaign inside Lebanon and on the border with Syria, fighting against a re-emerging Hezbollah that has been funded by the Iranians and attempts of the Iranians to funnel weapons, cash, and personnel into this region once more. Remember, the fact that there is separation between countries doesn't mean that the Iranians are not traveling or attempting to travel freely between the two countries. And that's what we're witnessing in front of our eyes. We're witnessing the Iranians once more trying to get influence in Syria and in Lebanon. And the move that Israel is playing here, together with the US, together with the Syrian government at this point, is to eliminate their foothold, to make sure that Hezbollah doesn't reemerge as a power, that Lebanon is propped up again, then that Syria is stabilized again, and then when you pull in the regional puzzle, which is the Jordanians, the Egyptians, and Gaza, and the Palestinian Authority being rebuilt, along with the international aid that's coming in through the Qataris, the Turks, and hopefully one day the Saudis, we're looking at a rebuilding of the power balance in this region in a way that can be so much more stable and so much more significant than what we've seen in many years to come. There's a lot that needs to happen in the coming days and weeks ahead of us. The Syrian government needs to follow through on this agreement. Israel needs to see that this is a safe process for us to be part of, and the Americans need to continue putting pressure on all sides to make sure this happens. Because when all these puzzle pieces come together, Syria, Lebanon, the Gaza Strip, Egyptians being stabilized and encouraged, the Jordanians stabilized and incentivized, and everything else that's happening in this region, we move into a place of stability that we have not seen for many years in this region, and most importantly, without Iranian external influence. These are incredible times. Things are moving at a very rapid pace here. I don't say this lightly. What's happened in recent weeks is more significant than some events that have taken a lifetime in this region. I mean, we've been talking to the Syrian government for decades at this point. We've never been this close to having a proper agreement with them. And although there are a lot of obstacles, a lot of animosity, a lot of mistrust between the sides, we're closer now than we've been in a really long time to restabilizing the relationship with Syria, and through Syria, several other pieces will fall into place in this region.
Thank you, Mati, for giving us the detailed overview of the power shift in the Middle East. And once again, I'd like to call on all of you to be part of the TBN Israel team by sharing our content with as many people as possible so that the truth reaches far and wide. Make sure to leave a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to TBN Israel on YouTube. And now, we are concluding today's report with a look at the events in Iran. The Chief of Staff of the Naval Forces of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, General Ali Abdullahiani, declared on Tuesday that Iran's armed forces are at the highest level of readiness and are prepared to deal with any threat to the borders. During a visit to the Naz Island in the southeastern side of Iran, this is an area of Iran that's north of the Strait of Hormuz, Abdullahiani met to assess the readiness of the Guards' naval forces. He noted that security is maintained across all the country's islands and the coastal areas, with operational units that are demonstrating increased readiness to defend maritime and land borders, especially in the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf. In his words, the forces are now more capable than ever, with enhanced capabilities compared with previous years. 2 days earlier, the Iranian army's deputy commander, General Habibullah Sayari, said that the country is constantly strengthening its military capabilities and that threats evolve constantly, so we must always be ready. If we are strong and possess a high level of deterrence, no one will dare to harm our interests. So I think these men are delusional. Do you agree? Or do you think that they must know something that the rest of us do not know and do not talk about? So let me know what you think about this in the comments. And by the way, Israel does not have a border with Iran. So the only way that they can defend against us or attack us is by rockets or by an air force. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel, in this region, and we call on you to pray. This is a spiritual war, as you see. It's not a logical war, it's not a political war, it is a spiritual war. So let's pray for God to intervene in the spirit. Let's pray for our enemies, for the leaders of Iran to have a change of heart, or for the Iranian people to have a change of leadership. Let's pray for the people in Gaza to have a better leadership without terrorism. Let's pray for the people of Israel that are rebuilding after 2 years of war. Let's pray for the hostages, and let's keep praying for the IDF soldiers. And never forget, pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.